A very good afternoon to you. I'm glad that you found time to be with us this afternoon. Here is the latest news from across the continent of Africa, and we start from Nigeria, where now the country has sanctioned about 25 broadcast stations for failing to adhere to broadcasting laws while covering last month's general election. The National Broadcasting Commission, NBC, has also issued a final warning to 16 other broadcast stations for various poll-related offences, local media has reported. 17 broadcast stations were accused of airing partisan content 24 hours prior to election. 3 stations were sanctioned for inciting comments, while 4 stations were blamed for divisive ethnic and religious content. 1 station was sanctioned for announcing results ahead of an official announcement by the Electoral Commission. And what the Director General of NBC, Balarabe Ilela, said is that subversive discussions and reckless comments capable of tearing the country apart as a people were broadcast freely without proper gatekeeping. Ethics and professionalism were thrown overboard. Mr. Ilela urged all broadcast stations to adhere to provisions of laws on broadcasting ahead of Saturday's governorship and state assembly polls. And South African authorities have asked Twitter to take down a video that reportedly incites violence against those who will not participate in protest marches planned for the 20th of March. The opposition party Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, is organizing nationwide marches to protest against the country's power crisis and has called on President Cyril Ramaphosa to resign. In a statement, the Film and Publication Board, FPB, said the video warns that any pupil wearing school uniform during the protest will be beaten up, as well as teachers and police officers. The video was posted by a person claiming to be a member of EFF. It said members of the public have been advised not to share, repost or distribute the said video, and offenders could face prosecution for disseminating or distributing prohibited content. Police have said they would be on a high alert to avert any violence as the Julius Malema-led EFF party vowed to shut down the entire country on Monday. Mr. Malema insists that the protests are not illegal and has warned that anyone who attempts to stop them would meet their maker. News 24 from South Africa has reported. Well, very well, I guess we are slowly becoming like France, where they say you protest and then you talk later. Protest comes first, and South Africa is known to be a country that protests, and Julius Malema fits the bill so well. And of course another protest that is also looming here in Nairobi, but I will digress and move on to Mozambique. President Filipe Nyusi has announced the immediate allocation of close to $3.4 million for reconstruction in the aftermath of Cyclone Freddy. The cyclone made landfall over the weekend for the second time in a month, and the country has received more than a year's worth of rainfall in the past 4 weeks. At least 53 people have died, while hundreds of thousands are at a risk of humanitarian crisis. Local agencies are now reporting. President Nyusi said the amount will be spent on rebuilding schools and destroyed infrastructure, but acknowledged it was not enough. The government has reduced docking charges for ships carrying emergency products meant for the affected communities. He also extended the terms of a commission mandated to work on national recovery after extreme weather conditions. Mr. Nyusi on Wednesday also visited areas severely affected by the cyclone in the country's central province of Zambezia. And on Wednesday, King Charles, met accountants, NHS consultants and charity workers who have made a new life in the United Kingdom. Sudanese activist Amuna Adam invited him to meet her community when the pair met on Holocaust Memorial Day. The event, organized by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust and the human rights organization Waging Peace, was held at Central London venue used for events by the UK's Sudanese community. Addressing the men and women who fled the mass killings, the king said, "It has been a very special visit for me, and I can assure you that I've heard your voices." Now, the civil war in the Darfur region of Sudan began in 2003 with the black African farming community persecuted by the Arab militia who destroyed villages and murdered civilians, with conflict continuing up to date. And then we head over to Tunisia, and this controversy or some sentiments that were made by President Kais Saied, and I seems to be the gift that keeps on giving, as the effect of his sentiments continue to unravel now, as dozens of Burkina Faso nationals in Tunisia have been repatriated back home in the wake remarks weeks ago by President Kais Saied against sub-Saharan African migrants. Mr. Saied said the migrants were part of a conspiracy to damage the country's demographic composition, which triggered racially motivated abuse and violence against them. On Wednesday, 64 passengers arrived at Burkina Faso's capital on a government-chartered flight. They were welcomed by emotional relatives along with some government officials. Minister Karamoko Jean-Marie Traoré is quoted by the AFP news agency saying it was the government's responsibility to look out for the security and well-being of its citizens. He said this was the first contingent of people to arrive and that other groups would return through other arrangements. And the latest report from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crimes now indicate that global cocaine production jumped to record levels over the past 2 years. And in a recent report, the UNODC says cocaine use is increasing in Africa and Asia, as well as traditional markets like Europe and the Americas. It says coca cultivation in South Africa rose by 35% between 2001 and 2022. It also added that the past decade had seen new hubs for cocaine trafficking emerge in West and Central Africa. The head of the UNODC, Garda Wale, said the potential for the cocaine market to expand in Africa and Asia was a dangerous reality. And then we revisit a story that we've been keeping you up to tabs with, and that is the current happenings in Senegal, where security vehicles and barricades surrounded the home of a Senegalese opposition leader on Wednesday as authorities banned rallies on the eve of a trial that could determine his eligibility to contest next year's presidential election. A cordon of police in a riot gear barred the way to Osman Sonko's vehicle at the end of his street outside his home in the capital, Dakar. A footage broadcast live on social media has shown security forces fired tear gas as reporters interviewing a member of parliament who had come to support Sonko. An AFP journalist was a witness to that, and Sonko's confinement comes amid growing tensions a year ahead of the presidential election, raising fears of violence in a state reputed for stability. Sonko, a firebrand politician who came third in the last presidential election, is expected in court on Thursday after being sued by Tourism Minister Mame Mbaye Niang for defamation, insult and forgery. The police set up roadblocks in the streets surrounding his home, and the prefect of Dakar, Mortala Tine, also banned a pro-Sonko demonstration planned for Wednesday afternoon. He cited real threats to public order and a construction site on the chosen route. The opposition has called for nationwide demonstrations to condemn what it calls manipulation of the justice system and arbitrary arrest. Rallies have been authorized outside of Dakar. On Tuesday, Sonko held an authorized gathering where he told thousands of supporters that he was ready to fight. In addition to the defamation lawsuit, Sonko is also facing separate charges of rape and making death threats based on a complaint by an employee at a beauty salon where he was going to get a massage. On January 18th, he was referred to a criminal court on those charges. That case has been a source of tension in Senegal now for 2 years. The two legal affairs could determine whether Sonko will be allowed to run in the presidential election set for February 2024. Sonko claims the charges are a part of a plot to torpedo his chances. He has also claimed President Macky Sall intends to override the constitution and run for a third term. Sall, who was elected in 2012 and yet again in 2019, has not confirmed or denied whether he seeks a third spell in office. Very well, and the latest from Zimbabwe is that Zimbabweans in Voting units across Harare formed waiting lines on Wednesday to register for the country's forthcoming polls. In 5 months, Zimbabweans will vote in harmonized presidential and legislative elections. Ahead of the vote, whose dates have not been scheduled yet, Zimbabwe Electoral Commission (ZEC) has launched a 10-day registration blitz to enable those intending to register as voters to obtain critical documents like birth certificates and national identity cards. And the latest visit by U.S. top diplomat, the Secretary of State, and that is Anthony Blinken, who has embarked on his latest official trip to the African continent, where he will become the first Secretary of State from the United States to visit Niger. Thursday's historic visit comes as the West African country emerges as an increasingly significant partner to the United States and its European allies in the Sahel region following successive coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and the growing influence of Russia's Wagner mercenary group. The trip follows U.S. President Joe Biden's hosting of U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit in December, part of a pledge to increase U.S. engagement with the continent. Speaking to reporters last week, the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs Molly Fee called Niger one of the most important partners on the continent in terms of security cooperation, particularly in terms of countering armed groups in the area. Niger borders Mali and Burkina Faso, where the Al-Qaeda-affiliated Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslimin, JNIM, and the Islamic State of Greater Sahara, an ISIL affiliate, have jokered for power through violence that in turn has inflamed communal tensions, driven in part by the ravages of climate change. The violence first took root in Mali in the wake of 2012 uprising in the country's north, but it has since spread throughout the Sahel, at times reaching more than prosperous coastal West African countries. And then some information from the United Nations Security Council based that touches on South Sudan. And the UNSC voted on Wednesday to extend for another year its mission in South Sudan, the world's youngest state, which is undertaking a fragile peace process but remains plagued by post-civil war violence. 13 of the Council's 15 members voted to extend the mandate of the mission known as UNMISS, or United Nations Missions in South Sudan, until March 15, 2024. China and Russia abstained. Early this month, the head of UNMISS, Nicholas Haysom, urged South Sudan's government to implement its peace agreement in order to hold credible elections next year. UNMISS, one of the global body's most expensive operations with an annual budget of $1.2 billion, will maintain its force levels with a ceiling of 17,000 troops and 2,101 police personnel, according to a United Nations statement. The adopted resolution allows UNMISS to carry out tasks in 4 key areas, and that is protecting civilians, improving conditions for delivering of humanitarian aid, supporting for implementation of the peace process, and monitoring and reporting on violations of international humanitarian law and human rights. After a 5-year civil war ended in 2018, having claimed at least 380,000 lives, President Salva Kiir and his rival Riek Machar formed a transitional government and agreed to join forces in a single army to protect the population hard hit by the conflict and climatic disasters. Armed violence, however, continues in the oil-rich country where the majority of the people live below the poverty line. And that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. 14 minutes past 3 p.m. now. You are now up to date. I will not take so much of your time this afternoon, but I'd like for us to just do a quick rundown on some of the stories that I've just brought to your attention. And maybe we just start from where I've ended, and that is in South Sudan. Of course, the United Nations Security Council had to extend another year the mission in South Sudan, and that is because the purpose as to which this mission was formed has not been achieved yet. South Sudan on its way to really be able to achieve some of the things that it's meant to achieve, so that there even could be a drawdown of this mission, the United Nations mission in the country. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell, but the United Nations Security Council voted on Wednesday. It's interesting that China and Russia abstained from voting. I don't know what kind of message they could be sending, because, South Sudan, as much as it's being supported by the United Nations, but, a country like the US personally is one of the key funders and supporters of that peace process as part of the Troika country. So it's interesting that China and Russia would abstain. I don't know if Russia has any interest in South Sudan. I probably shouldn't go and research, but I know China has been mentioned a few times in some of the interest it has had in South Sudan. There is a report that was an investigation that was carried out by the Sentry Group that was presented to the United Nations Security Council over the activities of some countries and individuals from these countries that I think have vowed to maintain the status quo in South Sudan, and so through that they get to really benefit through having connections with top military officers or top government officials or things like that. So, and I think I had China being mentioned there, but I'll go research again and bring you a proper information about that. But it's interesting that they would abstain, from such a vote. But it was expected. It was expected that the United Nations mission in South Sudan was going to be renewed. It has been renewed again for another 1 year, and come next year, it will also be renewed for another 1 year. And this time round, they've even offered to have more. To maintain force levels with a ceiling of 17,000 troops. Those are just the troops. And then we have an extra 2,101 police personnel. Can you do math and imagine in your head what 17,000 human beings would look like? And then imagine in your head what 17,000 humans with guns and combat gears would look like in a country. And yet with all this, there has been no reduction of, no buffing of the conflict that gets to affect the civilians there. There has not been a proper protection, a proper wall to ensure that even as the wrangles and whatever and the politics, they figure out that on the other side, but the people in the meantime gets protected. 17,000, and these are just the army. On top of that, we have another 2,101 police personnel. So why do and it's one of the most expensive missions for the United Nations, this one and that one of the Democratic Republic of Congo. At the DRC, we have about 18,000 and 16,000 of those troops, and the others are the support staff for the United Nations. So I have not properly understood why, with these huge numbers of troops in these conflict-ridden countries like South Sudan, like Democratic Republic of Congo, which other country has a huge contingent of the UN peacekeeping mission. But at least these two countries, and yet one of the key mandates, I just read them here for you, like this one, UNIMIS, one of the key areas they're supposed to be looking at. There are four, actually. There are four adopted resolutions that allows UNIMIS to carry out these four key tasks, and one of them is protecting civilians. Has UNIMIS been able to do this function properly while they are extending the mandate of this peacekeeping mission? Are they able to review, perhaps look at how UNIMIS has been operating and has been addressing these four key areas, and see how can we better effectively make sure that UNIMIS is really able to meet this key mandate in its function there in South Sudan? Or we're just reiterating, because this already was there. This was when they were sent into South Sudan, this was the mandate. So it really hasn't changed. So they've just reiterated what has been there. But so far, if we are to just look at these four areas and how this has been working and how they've been able to even meet this function, you'll see that it's really lacking in ways in which this has been able to be implemented. And so one of the key areas is to protect the civilians. That has not been achieved as well as it should have. When you have this many troops on the ground, surely you should be able to create a buffer among the warring communities, as well as ensuring that our civilians are protected where they are. This is a huge number of troops. In South Sudan it's big, but it's not that big. I mean, 16,000, and it's not like the whole country is worrying. There are specific areas that are hot spots. And so while you renew this mandate, did you sit down and look at how so far this mission has been functioning, and look at the areas that perhaps needs to be improved upon, and look at maybe a different strategy by which this mission needs to achieve these goals? Or you just decided, well, this mandate is coming to an end, and we need to renew it because, such initiatives also has been a source of money making for some few members there at the United Nations, and that is the truth. And so it is in their best interest that these things keeps renewed. And for South Sudan, I think it's important. I think it's important because the country still needs to stabilize, the people's lives there still needs to be protected by these forces, and all these other things that this peacekeeping mission is supposed to be doing in South Sudan. But are they really doing that? Are they really doing that? I've been questioning this mission in South Sudan, and I've also been questioning that huge mission also in the Democratic Republic of Congo. If one of the key mandates is to protect the civilians, and every now and then, especially in the DRC, you hear ADF has massacred this much a number of people. After 2 days, you hear another of these rebel groups have killed this number of people. Why do we not have these mission groups in this country actually doing one of the key mandates, and which is protecting the civilians? That is number one. In South Sudan and also in the DRC and in other areas that the United Nations has these missions, these expensive missions. Think about it. 17,000 soldiers and an extra 2,101 police that is on the payroll of the United Nations. Okay? This is a huge presence of security that should be able to make a difference. So why has it not been making that difference? So another mandate of UNIMIS in South Sudan is improving conditions for delivery of humanitarian aid. I think they're able to do that to some good extent. They're able to provide for conditions and security so that when there's aid, because these countries really depend on the aid, especially South Sudan, really depends on aid from the United Nations and from other countries. So these soldiers are meant to ensure that they improve the conditions for delivering the humanitarian aid needed, be it in terms of food, be it in terms of medicine, to ensure that this aid can move to where it is required to go without any interruptions because of the dangers that is brought about by this instability and this continued conflict. And the third mandate of UNIMIS in South Sudan is to support for the implementation of the peace process. I don't know how they're doing this, and I know they should be engaging in a few activities in peace building, as much as the peace it's a peacekeeping mission, but also in peace building, in ensuring that perhaps they create awareness around the communities. They see how can they have them engage and perhaps set up mechanisms where the locals might find alternatives of engaging if at all there's a conflict, without necessarily having to physically fight each other, and tell them, hey, there is a way that you can resolve your problem if this community says, cattle have been stolen by the other community, or that community's farms has been raided by the pastoralist community, and you're feeling kind of way. Instead of wrapping up your youth to go fight the other community, there are other ways that you could explore that will not be detrimental. So just creating awareness and supporting and advancing these kinds of activities that will help in implementing of the peace process. And of course, if there's a need for the meeting of the leadership in South Sudan, they should be able to facilitate that. And while those meetings are happening, they should be able to offer the protection that is required, for all the actors that are involved. So that is just a bit of part of the implementation process of the peace process. They're supposed to provide for that security that is required, and also support initiatives that will really enhance the security, the peace process there in South Sudan. And the fourth and the last key area that UNIMIS is meant to be doing is monitoring and reporting on violations of international humanitarian law and human rights. Now, this last point they do so well. All those reports you hear being presented at the United Nations Security Council on South Sudan, on the Democratic Republic of Congo, they do it so well. So sometimes you wonder, while you're sitting here reporting about 43 people were murdered and this amount of houses were burned, what were you doing? Were you just sitting there with a pen and paper, just writing and monitoring and taking up this data so that you're able to present it to the United Nations Security Council? Or what measures did you take to, one, avert these kinds of things to happen, and two, just be preventative ways, because there is also part of the peace building, a peace process, according to the United Nations. So one of the mandates that encapsulates this implementation of the peace process is also identifying these early warning signs. It is part of that, and seeing what are the hotspots, what are the issues, how can we be able to address these matters before they get to a fully blown war? How can we be able to arrest it before it becomes a serious problem? So that is part of them. So the monitor and the report, the monitoring and the reporting is perfect. These missions do a fantastic job. It is from the United Nations mission in the DRC that we know that some forces from allegedly from Rwanda have been seen under the surveillance, the good surveillance of this UN mission, them leaving DR and coming into, Rwanda and coming into the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is through their surveillance and monitoring that you're able to get these substantial reports that we see being presented to the United Nations Security Council every now and then. So they do a good job. They do a good job. But I wouldn't, on the fourth part, but I would imagine that, I'd like one day to just hear a report where, this such and such an attack was being planned, but according to a report, we were able to receive the intelligence, and then we were able to thwart maybe that attack or find alternative ways to, we convinced these communities to engage different. I'd like to hear, like an initiative they took as far as in their monitoring and reporting, that they also were able to participate, and the role they play, in helping in maintaining the international humanitarian law, rather than just sitting there and waiting for these atrocities to happen, so that they have these mind-blowing, sad reports to be presenting to the United Nations every now and then, because that is part of their mandate. I feel like they just sit somewhere and not really, I don't say not care, but not take the initiative, because, for that mission to be sustained in that country long, I've told you, it is part of, for some other countries and other entities, it is an enterprise, but also we can't underscore the importance. We can't downplay the importance of these missions in these different countries. So as long as they keep coming up with these reports that are alarming, obviously we'll keep having these missions mandates renewed, and for some people it's some good news, but for the rest of us, we're sitting here asking, fine, as much as these missions mandate should be renewed, because obviously the countries are not stable, but what is the evaluation of, say, the past 1 year? What was done? What was not able to be done? How can these missions improve on it? How are we able to track progress? That's all I'm asking. How are we able to track progress? And then as we renew this mandate, what specific actionable points should they be approaching the situation, depending on which country these countries are situated. So it's just not about renewing of the mandate of these missions, but really how can we strengthen these missions? And even as we renew the mandate of these missions, like they've done in South Sudan, how can we make sure that they become more effective in achieving these goals that we've set out for them, and they are able to actually the impact of their presence in these countries are able to be felt. Because if you ask most South Sudanese, they'll tell you, have they not attacked these missions bases there? A few of them. They're saying, you're here, but we were attacked, a few meters away, not even kilometers, 100 meters away, 200 meters away, we were attacked. So why are you here if you cannot protect us? So we have to evaluate. We have to evaluate. And United Nations, the organ, and of course the committee that is concerned with such matters, should be evaluating and engage in how these missions are operating, and if at all they are able to really actualize and realize the mandate that they have been given. These mandates are usually crafted depending on the needs of a specific country and what areas really need to be addressed, and that will advise why they even set up and they send these missions in these different countries. So different countries and different missions in different countries, they all have different mandates. And so for South Sudan, those are key points and key tasks that this UNIMIS is supposed to be looking at and to be implementing and to be involved in, and to see that this is a goal that has been set for them by the United Nations, and the rest of the world is just hoping that they'll be able to actually live up to that mandate that has been set for them, so that we don't keep renewing we don't keep renewing these missions, and yet at the end of the day there's nothing to write home about. The insecurities still persist, the number of civilians who get affected, who have to leave their homes because of forced immigration, because they're not safe in their homes, they have to leave, and yet we have this, has to stop. So their impact and their presence must be felt. And since it has not that has not been the case, then we have to ask ourselves, so why is it that even having these 17,000 troops and over 2,000 police personnel, why do the people not feel the impact of the presence of this United Nations mission personnel in the country? Why do we have still an increased number of communal fighting? Why? You have to ask, and you have to go back and interrogate and see what strategies are you perhaps using in achieving these goals, and how are they working, and if they're not working, how can you better your systems, how can you improve on your effectiveness? So I hope we're just not sitting here renewing these mandates for the sake of renewing these mandates because a few people in the top food chain get to benefit. It has to make some sense, and they have to go there with a proper goal and focus, and see that this mission is able to achieve its goal, and then over time reduce the number of that mission when you're able to achieve this goal. But if you're still thinking of adding more troops, then that means there's something this mission is doing that is not effective. So how can we improve on it? How can we make it more effective? How can it have more impact that is really felt on the ground? So I think, renewing this mandate, I think it's important and crucial. We all agree that South Sudan cannot presently deal with itself or handle its security as much as it should, or take care of itself in certain areas. So it does need our help, our collective help. And of course, the body that represents all of us is the United Nations. So it does need that help. And it's good that they have renewed that mission. But for how long are we going to be renewing this mission? Is it effective, and how can we improve on it? I think those are the questions. If we can get into the nitty-gritty of them, might help us on how to craft a strategy that can actually be effective. All right, even as we keep pushing the leadership of South Sudan to do right, so that they're able to also do their part. Because if just one side, the UNIMIS, is doing their job and all that, but the other, the political side, is not really up to the task, and whatever it's doing is not in harmony with this mission, then it's futile. There has to be a symbiotic relationship. As we support the peace and stability of South Sudan, also the leaders should create that environment that fosters and enables South Sudanese to start thinking under those lines of, we need to be peaceful, we need to be united, we need to find other means of resolving our problems. But if you see these public parts and stances being made by these leading top politicians, President Salva Kiir sacking the opposition ministers without consultation, and and the rebuttal from the opposition, and all these things are playing out in public, it is not creating a condition where peace can thrive. So as much as this United Nations mission is fighting to and helping in that peace building and peacekeeping, but if the other side is weak in terms of doing the same, so this does not work well and does not augur well and does not support totally an environment where peace can foster. So it requires a concerted effort for truly one day the world to realize, because now it's our business, the world to realize a more peaceful South Sudan. And that is where I will end the show for this afternoon. I want to thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll see you here tomorrow, God willing. Bye-bye for now.